We are live. Welcome to episode 25 of Shifty Perspective. In this episode, we have Dr. Emil Kendziorra. Dr. Emil Kendziorra is the president of the board of the European Biostasis Foundation based in Switzerland. He has a background in medicine, cancer research, and is also involved in a number of different startups. He is currently setting up the first European cryopreservation facility, which to some people is known as cryonics, or where you basically are keeping somebody alive or frozen or low temperature until you can bring them back in the future. It's stuff from science fiction and seeming to become science fact. So Dr. Emil, how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. How about you?
I'm good. I've got a little bit of a sniffle, not COVID. I believe I have tested myself and I'm negative, but apart from that, feeling pretty good.
Awesome.
How are things going then with your? In fact, rather than just going straight into how are things going with the setup of the foundation and the facility, would you like to share to listeners what it is exactly you are in the process of doing? Because I kind of butchered it a bit in my way.
No worries, all good. Yeah, happy to do so.
Cool.
So, as you already mentioned, I'm in the process, or I have been building an institute, a research institute, and at the same time, and this is what you mentioned, this is this European Biostasis Foundation based in Switzerland, but this is a research institute. So this will do biomedical research, organ transplantation research, other types of in quotation marks, boring research. And on the other hand, I'm setting up, or I have been building a company for Europe, based here in Berlin, in Germany, called Tomorrow Biostasis, that offers cryopreservation for customers. And as you already mentioned, cryopreservation is an advanced medical procedure. Very much people usually know this concept from science fiction, right? Like from Star Trek, from Star Wars to a degree, and from other sci-fi movies, where you go into on long interstellar flights, you go into these cryo sleeping pods where
we appear to have lost connection. Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, but I lost video for a second.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened there.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out a bit, but it seems to be maybe fine.
Okay.
Video seems to be good now.
Cool. Okay, great. So it cuts out just as you said, science fiction for me. So if you want to continue from there.
Yeah. So as I just mentioned, it's a concept that is mostly known from science fiction to most people, from Star Trek, from other sci-fi movies. Where figuratively speaking, like when they go on long, travel through another star or something like that, they go into these cryo sleeping pods, where usually with low temperature and some other technologies, people being preserved for long periods of time to make this long journey, which might be years or even decades long. And fundamentally, what we're doing is the same concept. And the idea behind that, of course, is, so my background, as you mentioned, is in medicine. And currently there's still a large amount of diseases, be it cancer, be it heart disease, and whatever you name it, which is currently with the current medical technology not curable. Where people, when they're 70, when they're 80, when they're 85, they die due to these diseases. And of course, medical progress is quite rapid, and 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, 50 years down the line, a significant amount of diseases that are currently lethal, where currently you die due to them, will be curable, right? Yeah. This has been the history of medicine since the beginning of time, basically. Mm-hmm. Now, what cryopreservation does is that if you're being diagnosed with a disease that is currently will lead to your death, and cancer, of course, is always my go-to example because that's my background and that's also very tangible. So there's a lot of cancers that are currently will lead to your death within 6 months, within a year, whatever. Then cryopreservation is a potential technology where after you've been legally pronounced dead, you're being cryopreserved with low temperatures, not freezing, so nothing freezes due to a cryoprotective agent. And then now, once medical technology has advanced enough in the future, and when I say advanced enough, I mean a point where the underlying disease, so the disease that killed you in the first place, is curable. And then, of course, very importantly, where also the cryopreservation is reversible. So when you take someone out of cryopreservation and resuscitate them, bring them back, at that point, well, then they would be brought back to life. And of course, this is currently not a thing that is currently, it is something that you can't do yet. But then again, with future technology, it might very well be possible.
So at the moment, there's another facility in America, right, which are doing this, but they haven't. What is the status that there are just people being kept, and we have the technology to keep them, but we don't have the technology to resuscitate them.
Exactly. So there have been organizations that have existed for decades. So the most prominently known one is probably Alcor, and then the second probably CI, Chronics Institute, based in the US, that have been doing cryopreservations for, well, decades, since 40, 50 years, right? But to be very precise, they've only put people into cryopreservation and then maintained their cryopreservation. What they have not yet done is taking anybody out of cryopreservation. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because technologically, we as a society, we as a medical community, it's not possible as of now. But arguably, there's no fundamental problem with it. It's just, a devil's in the details problem. There's a lot of problems that we currently can't solve, but which fundamentally will, at least, I would argue, which are likely to be solved over the next decades.
What would you say are the main problems facing resuscitating somebody, apart from the curing of the disease or whatever has killed them? What are the most prominent things that your issues you're facing?
Right. So unfortunately, in medicine, it's rarely this one big thing. It's usually a large set of small things that we don't understand well yet. So topics, for example, are this cryoprotective agent is toxic to a degree. So you need to reduce this toxicity and take out the toxicity when you want to resuscitate someone. Then cooling organs or cooling bodies or cooling tissue down to very low temperatures creates different stresses on the cells. So
does it not damage them? Like freezer burn, essentially?
Not that, luckily. I mean, this is why you use this cryoprotective agent to reduce this amount of what we, when you take a vegetable and put it into a freezer, and then you take it out, the vegetable after that is not really, it has lost its structure to a degree, right? It's not, that would be great to eat after you've frozen, I don't know, an apple or whatever it might be. For this, you use this cryoprotective agent, and so this is why I'm very much always avoiding the word freezing, because nothing freezes. It's a process that is called vitrification, which is a word that describes basically a situation or a type of how this material is being cryopreserved without freezing. But nevertheless, still cells take some damage, which needs to be repaired in the future, and so on. So fundamentally, what you can currently say that with model organisms in a lab, you can do cryopreservations and take the organisms out of cryopreservation after, and they're fully fine. But now between this model organism, which is microscopic almost, like a very relatively small, and a human, there's a lot of devil in the details problems, and this is why there's still a lot of research needed.
There are animals in the I don't know about animals, but there are creatures, right, naturally that essentially do this, or is this something that we are completely creating?
Yeah, so they do something similar. So, for example, the one of the very known animals is a so-called tree frog, which is a frog that during winter goes into a very, very deep stasis almost, where their body cools down significantly, almost very close to the point of freezing, and then comes spring and warmer temperatures and so on. They basically, by all intents and purposes, they resuscitate But technologically, there is a bit of a difference between these two things. But it's the fundamentally the same concept. And this is also why we talk about biostasis. So bio, right, tissue, whatever, or living matter, and then stasis, basically, like pausing the biological processes to then restart later down the line.
And is there a lot of research into, for example, these tree frogs and creatures that do this to kind of work out the mechanisms of how this works?
Yeah, not enough. So
Yeah.
there can always be significantly more research. So none of these are easy problems, right? I'm not saying this will be something that we will be able to do in the next 3 to 4 years, right? This will be 10, 20, 30, whatever, 50, even 100 years until this will, or at least, I mean, this is pure speculation, right? It's very, very difficult to predict when research will be will be due X or Y or Z. But this will take a time, and this is until people can be taken out of cryopreservation. But of course, if you are in cryopreservation, time is not really an issue for you. So
No.
you have the time, right? There's no metabolic activity going on anymore. So at that point, you can wait as long it takes. So there is some research into other organisms that do this naturally, but there's more research in cells and organs and other avenues of research that might generate more low-hanging fruits.
Okay. Is it something that you would recommend, but would it be recommended that somebody does this before they are pronounced medically dead, or is that even possible? Or do you have to wait? Like, for example, if you were terminally ill with a form of cancer and you knew you only had maybe weeks at the most to live, could you do this before that you are actually fully died?
Yeah, that's not possible. So legally speaking, this is an experimental procedure. So none of the organizations, and neither me or we or whatever, are getting involved in that at all. So it's always at a time when patients who before they died gave very, very clear informed consent. So very clearly stated that this is something they want to have done, like orally, written, and really without any doubt that this is their absolute intended what they want to have happen. But from a procedural standpoint, we would only always start once the patient has been clearly pronounced legally deceased, and then practically speaking, legally speaking, the patient donated their body to this organization that does this cryopreservation. So there's nothing done before the patient is legally dead.
Okay, so does that mean, though, that you have to react extremely quickly because decay happens, and the longer you leave it, surely the less likely and the more difficult it's going to be to resuscitate somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. So time is definitely an issue here, or time is definitely a point that needs to be it needs to be as fast as possible. What's important to say, though, is that what we as society call death changes over time. So in the past, when people had heart attacks, when their heart stopped beating, well, this was it, right? And this is not super long ago. This was in the beginning of the 20th century, right? CPR, like resuscitation, chest thumping and so on. This was not a thing back then. So what we consider a point where a patient is dead and where you can't bring them back changes over time dramatically, right? Currently, if their heart stops beating and you don't do CPR, that's medical malpractice, right? So the logic being that, currently, for all intents and purposes, we would call someone who is cryopreserved dead, right? Their metabolism is not running, they don't have any brain waves, they are, dead. But then fundamentally, and this is now the idea of cryopreservation, you cryopreserve them at a time, and this is also why the speed is so important, you cryopreserve them at a time where their body, with future technology, still maintains the capacity for life.
Okay.
So where similar to how, someone who dies and then CPR is done, the body still maintains the capacity, and due to CPR and of course also more advanced procedures, you bring them back to life. And now the point, what can be brought back, arguably, and I would argue that's a high probability, will change over time. And with cryopreservation,
Okay.
you need to change as much so that you can then bring someone back from cryopreservation.
What about brain damage? Because would that not be a high risk, even if you could bring somebody back, if the brain has started to, like, when people are pronounced brain dead and people have been brought back, isn't that normal anyway, that brain damage will occur? So would that happen?
So that again comes down to how fast you are, right? So let's say someone has a heart attack, and then the second once the heart stops beating, and in that, of course, the oxygen that is being provided to the brain is being reduced. At that point, cells start dying.
Yeah.
That is what we call brain damage, fundamentally, right? Cells in the brain dying, and if more and more cells die, this becomes more and more pronounced and more, in quotation marks, visible brain damage. So now, if you start cooling very, very quickly, this is the fundamental logic of cryopreservation. If you cool, cells die later. So they can maintain low oxygen, so they can survive on a cellular level with lower oxygen for longer. Now you cool down very quickly, and you cool down to a point where you can maintain cells at that at that temperature without dying for decades or even hundreds of years. Right? Temperature is very, very, very powerful in that regard.
Wow.
So there will probably be some cellular damage, but then the idea would be that with advanced medical technology, and I don't think you can make any reasonable assumption, what medical technology will be able to do in 50 or 100 years. It will at least be probably very, very advanced compared to what we do today. It's very much imaginable that that will then be repairable, and then the patient will be able to be resuscitated.
Wow. I mean, it's actually impossible to guess when and where, because if you think like 20 years ago, would we expect it to be where we're at now? And 50 years ago, like, we just can't predict where technology goes.
Yeah.
So
it's very difficult. And you just need to look back, basically, 100 years ago, all the advanced medical technology that we currently consider absolutely normal was not even to be thought of back then. I mean, take transplantation, right? This is a relatively new technology. It was in the 60s and 70s. Before that, this was not a concept that anybody was aware of. Now it's a standard medical procedure, right? Genome sequencing was not something to be thought of in the beginning of the 20th century, right? So. And these advances will continue. It's very difficult to predict them because it's usually not a linear approach where everything happens per year, but it's usually a paradigm shift when then some new technology comes out and this changes the game. But this will continue to be the case over the next years and decades.
What is the kind of general scientific consensus amongst your peers and colleagues? I mean, apart from the people that you work with on this, is it like an uphill battle and something that's really seen as fringe?
So it has changed over the time. So in the past, I would argue, it was a bit fringe probably, right? And it still is not mainstream by any means.
Yeah.
But then again, if I talk to my ex-colleagues and doctors, if you would have asked 100 doctors, 20 years before the first heart transplantation, if you would have asked them, hey guys, what do you think about, taking one heart from one human that has just died and putting it into another human that needs a new heart? I'm very convinced that a lot of people would have said like, dude, this is no, right? This is super weird. This is wrong. Yeah. This can't be done, right? So my point always being that what is normal right now, it doesn't mean that's good or bad or anything, right? It just means we don't have this new technology yet, right? So I'm always trying to look at these things from what is fundamentally possible, and what are the ethical, moral, and whatever downsides to it. And in my book, if someone has the informed consent and really stated, this is what I want to have happen, then who am I to say that this is not something they're allowed to do or shouldn't do or whatever? So, but there's still a lot of research needed, and there's also still a lot of discussion in the science, in the community, how in detail you should do the best cryopreservation, what is necessary to do a good cryopreservation, and all of that.
I've heard, I think there's a case in America of Alcor being sued, I believe. Is that something that is a regular occurrence, or something that you would have plans in place to stop if somebody was pronounced medically dead and then their family actually opposed for them to be preserved? What kind of ways around that?
Yeah, so it happens once in a while, right? I mean, it also happens because cryopreservation currently is not necessarily cheap. It's with Alcor, for example, the price tag is in the range of 200 or 200 something thousand US dollars.
Wow.
We are one of our clear goals is we're working very, very hard on making cryopreservation significantly cheaper to make it affordable for everybody. Now,
do you have a ballpark figure for that, like roughly? Is it under 50, under 100, or?
Yeah, so I mean, this is not something that we will be able to achieve next year, but in the ballpark of 10 to 20,000 euros. But this this is not something. This is a long-term goal for which significantly larger amounts of people who are interested in sign up are necessary to then take the savings that you can, because you don't only need one medical team, for example. In general, what you call economics of scale, where you can provide a product significantly cheaper and more affordable if you just do it. If you sell it 1,000,000 times versus 10 times.
Yeah.
So legal cases happen once in a while, some of which are due to the fact that the family says, hey, we're not down with cryopreservation. We think this is not necessary, and then there's 200,000 euros that someone is getting, that could also be our inheritance.
Yeah,
right?
true.
So that is one potential problem here, right? Then of course there might be religious and moral objections and so on. So of course in Europe, these cases, these legal cases, suing everybody all the time and trying to get large damages and making
not the same.
It's less of a thing in Europe, right?
Yeah.
So the danger, or the danger of that in Europe is probably significantly lower than in the US, and we're very, very much focused on making absolutely sure that we have perfect and clear consent from the patient, which then makes it significantly more difficult to attack that wish.
I just honestly, I find it quite shocking that they even have a leg to stand on suing over this. Like, if the person is given such clear consent with a clear frame of mind, how can they justify, like, even over religious, if there are religious connotations? The fact is, if that person decides that's what they want, surely that's their right. I find that shocking.
The point is, I mean, the saying goes like, you can sue about everything, right? I mean, the question is if you're right, or if you're being given, and if you win in the end. And historically speaking, all the organizations that have been sued, be it in the US, be it in other countries, they did relatively well in court. So I mean, very well in court. So they won most of the challenges they got from wherever, be it from patients, be it from some local funeral home, whatever it might have been. They did very, very well. So if you're very careful about how you do the procedure and so on, then from a legal standpoint, you're relatively safe.
Okay. What happens? What is the plan for financial issues? So, for example, if I die and I have X amount of money, or I have property or businesses or assets, because if it's all well and good at being affordable if it's 10,000 euros to preserve yourself, but if you preserve yourself and you wake up and with inflation and everything, suddenly you've got nothing. What do you have to plan for that?
Yeah. So there are always two things to consider here in regards to cost, right? So one is, let's say the until cryopreservation can be reversed until people can be resuscitated. It takes significantly longer than we think, right? Let's just for argument's sake, let's say it takes 200 years, right? And now you're being cryopreserved, and now which money maintains your cryopreservation for that time, right? So one thing that is very positive in that light is that maintaining cryopreservation is relatively affordable. Depending on technology, in most cases, it just takes liquid nitrogen. So you buy more liquid nitrogen, which is very cold, and with this liquid nitrogen, you can maintain this cryopreservation. With some advanced technology, maybe you can also use electricity and so on. But you need it's relatively affordable to the tune of few hundred to maybe 1,000 euros per year. So what is being done to always make absolutely sure that this amount of money is available for anybody or anybody who is being cryopreserved, a large amount of money to depending on organizations, but let's take Alco and us, for example, as an example, somewhere in the vicinity of slightly above 100,000 US dollars or 100,000 euros are being put aside. And this money then is maintained in a non-profit foundation that invests this money with a very risk-averse investment strategy, with kind of the assumption of having a return of investment per year in the range of 3%. 3%, because historically you have around 2% inflation. Of course, currently you don't, but maybe in 20 years you do again. So 2% inflation, and then about 1.1% for return. And this 1%, and if you're, for example, we will take somewhere in the vicinity of 120,000 euros currently. This 1% gives you 1,200 euros per year that then maintains your cryopreservation. The other amount of money, or there are two other pots of money that are needed. One is the one that, resuscitation and the medical procedure to bring you back might be expensive. And then last but not least, let's say you come back 50, 100, 200 years down the line. What money do you use then to live, right? Like with what? Very difficult to predict how a future society might look, but let's say you need some money to buy food and whatever, right? So this is why you only use the interest from this 120,000 euros. So the 120,000 euros basically stays inflation adjusted, the same. Okay. So you have this money, and then when you die, let's say at 80 or 90 or whatever it might be, if at that point you have larger assets, have larger net worth, you can also put some part of that money aside in a specialized fund structure that then would return that money down the line once you're being resuscitated.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I guess it's just so hard to predict where society will be. I mean, maybe we won't even have money. Maybe that's
very possible, right? I mean, it's very possible that 200 years down the line, money is not a thing. But again, better safe than sorry. So it's. I mean, I would not say that this is something that I would be even remotely able to predict one way or the other. Yeah.
I've just got a question come in, which is the technology being looked at with regards to hibernation for the living? I know that this is a bit sci-fi, but just thinking of things like space travel, which you did mention the space travel at the beginning. Is this something that is actually being studied?
Yeah, very much so. Not by us though, because what is generally called hibernation is technologically it's targeting the fundamentally the same idea, being low temperatures means less metabolism, means longer living with less resources. So but then again, there is a difference in how you would do it. So what we would call hibernation is definitely being looked at mostly in two areas. One is literally space travel. So for example, NASA is looking at it for a very long, to Mars or even further than Mars. But here you would not go, you would only cool down the body, the astronaut's body to, I don't know the exact number, but let's say 20 degrees Celsius. So you would not go below the freezing point at all. And you do that to reduce the food intake that is necessary to maintain the body. and you do that to reduce the oxygen intake the body is needed. So this is one way it's done. The other part is in emergency medicine, to give more time where the body needs less oxygen again, until the operation to save the patient can be done. So you do that, for example, in patients that have gunshot wounds. So there's a hospital in Baltimore that recently published, I think a few years ago, that published a study where they cool down patients on the operating table to give more time for the operation. And then last but not least, so DARPA in the US is putting research money into that for soldiers that are being shot on the battlefield, to be able to bring them back and have enough time to bring them back to the field hospital or whatever it might be, without them dying. So there's a lot of research going into what you would call hibernation, but it goes in the same direction, but there is a difference between cryopreservation and hibernation.
On the hibernation thing, is that for deep space at least? Is that something that would? This might be a really stupid question, but where would aging come into that?
Yeah, I mean, arguably you would age less. So the logic being the following, right? What we call aging, right? I mean, is basically arguably accumulation of different types of damages, either that done, generated intrinsically due to cells dividing and not doing it perfectly, then also just by the fact, I mean, there's a saying like, we age because we live, because the metabolism creates, it's not perfect, it creates problems in quotation marks, in quotation marks, that what we then call aging, and that then manifest as diseases down the line if too much of that damage has accumulated. So if you reduce temperature, the metabolism runs at a slower rate, which means it also makes less mistakes in quotation marks, or less damaged products and less byproducts are being generated. So arguably during hibernation you age less. But then again, this is not something that can be recommended as an anti-aging strategy at all right now, because the procedure of hibernation again would be also like very, very experimental. So probably the damage that you would currently accumulate with these lower temperatures would be way outdo the damage that you would get from aging during the same time.
Just living, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, yeah.
There's another question. Would he do this himself? And if so, what would the fear be? Would you do this? I'm guessing you would. You will.
I like life a lot. So I like living. I feel like living is definitely to be preferred over. So as everybody I think is aware of, there's a lot of research going on currently in extending the human lifespan, right? With Calico and a lot of organizations in the US being involved and research institutes being involved and so on. So I hope that I do not need to use cryopreservation. So I very much hope that all these other people, that do the research in, improving medicine and living longer and so on, that they will achieve what they're set out to do over the next, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
I just unfortunately think that this is very, very difficult, because metabolism is difficult, medicine is difficult. I mean, my background is in cancer research, right? I mean, they've been doing cancer research for, literally decades, and every 10 years they say, 20 years down the line we're going to have cancer solved. About that, and of course we're far from that. And the last time they said it was in 2005. And when I say they, I mean the someone in the cancer research community. So that I do not need to use any cryopreservation technology, but I believe I will need to.
Yeah.
So if it comes to it, I definitely will. Because
Okay.
what's the downside? I mean, yeah, sure, the downside is the money. It's not free, but I hope I can make it significantly more affordable over the next 10 or so years. And then again, if that's the case, if it's not prohibitively expensive, what is the downside? And of course, this is a very personal decision, and I would not feel comfortable making a recommendation what people should do at all. But my decision is that there is no significant downside, and you might just do it.
Cool.
And the fear,
I,
the other part of the fear would be that it doesn't work. So I don't believe the fact that, some people say, I don't want to be woken up in a dystopian society in the future where everything is, horrible and there's a lot of war going on and so on. I think that the probability of that is pretty low, because if you look at history over longer periods of time, right, not the last 20 years, but let's look at the last, hundreds of thousands of years, society has always been getting better. By everything that you look at a benchmark, society has been getting better, right? We have less child mortality, we have more freedom, we have more, we have less people who live under the poverty line, and so on. So I would argue that over long stretches of time, there's a good case to be made that we would rather wake up in a utopian society than a dystopian society.
yeah.
The downsides are well, there aren't any crazy large amounts of downsides.
I agree. My thought is the same. Just why not? I mean, if you can do it, if it's available, and you love life, you enjoy living, then why would you not do that? It's the same for life extension. I mean, we've had on the podcast previously Dr. Nicola Conlon, who works with like NAD plus, and is very passionate into the life extension longevity field. And when we discussed that, it's like the kind of overall summary is, if you are healthy and happy, then you wouldn't want to just end your life. It's when you ask people, oh yeah, do you want to live forever, or do you want to extend your life? Often people will say, well, no, I just think it's natural to just die when I die. But the thing is, there is no, that just like with what you were saying earlier, it just extends. What is death? Also, what is a healthy lifespan? Just extends. So if we can, make us live 50 years more.
There's no question that dying is natural, but that does not mean anything. It doesn't mean it's good or bad, right? And it's always, if people say that,
true.
It's always very important to remind them that in 1900, dying at the average at 40 years of age was natural. The average lifespan in 1900 was 40. If someone dies today,
wow,
everybody would be like, that's a tragedy. Like, that's way too early. Mm-hmm. So what's fundamentally different than, 80, where currently everybody says, well, yeah, it's, that's how life goes. So what has changed? Why? So I don't understand, and I don't think there's a good argument for why 80 is the right time. If we today would say 40 is, and the people in the past said 40 is normal, then it's very, very possible that, in 100 years, people would say, well, these guys in 2020, why were they fine with 80? Now, 150 is normal. 80 is way too early, right? So the fact that it is natural, that is true. But, planes are also not natural. So we're doing a lot as society. Medicine is not natural. We're doing a lot of things that are not natural because we, as a society, believe that from a value perspective, they're good. So if someone wants to live longer because they like life and whatever, I feel like there are few arguments to make against that they shouldn't be able to do that, or that it is not in fact good.
I agree. Yeah, completely. We've got another. There's two more questions. One is, I think responding to what you were just saying, but to come alive and only to die again. That's
So that is a thing, right? So maybe to reiterate there a bit. So the resuscitation of patients would only be done at a point where three things are true. One, of course, you need to be able to do it with a high degree of quality and with a high degree of reliability, similar to you like a normal operation right now. Mm-hmm. Second, you would of course need to be able to cure the underlying disease that led to the patient's death in the first place, right? So let's say again, cancer, you would need to be able to cure that cancer. And last but not least, third, we would only do that at a time when the lifespan for the patient is significantly extended over how old they are. So as an example, let's say you're being cryopreserved after a natural death, in quotation marks natural death, at 85, then we would not resuscitate a patient, or it doesn't make sense to resuscitate a patient if at that point then the average lifespan is 87, right? So
Yeah.
back, and then 2 years later, they get another disease or whatever, and then they die due to that. So you would only do it at a time when, for example, at that point, then the lifespan is 150, where someone is being brought back at 85, and then they have another 60 years of life, and during those 60 years, you can then advance technology enough to keep the patient, or if the patient wants to maintain a healthy and active life longer. So always these three things need to happen. You need to be able to do it, you need to be able to cure the underlying disease, and you need to be able to provide a relevantly longer lifespan than from the time what the patient's age is.
That's interesting. I've not really thought about that as a whole, especially the idea of being resuscitated and being middle-aged, going from being old to then technically, like you said, in theory, you could then be middle age. What would be considered middle age? It's a very strange concept.
Right? You would be potentially, not only potentially, that would be kind of the pre-requirement, the prerequisite for actually doing it. That you would then, on a societal level, when you're being brought back, you're ballpark middle-aged.
Wow. Okay, so we've got more questions coming in. This is quite interesting. Is there interest in DNA preservation other than just a complete body? Like, I mean, I'm aware that you have the option at Alcor to preserve just your head, if I'm right, or just your brain. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. You do. I mean, Alcor, the head, the head.
And what about just DNA preservation?
Yeah, so it makes sense to a degree, but it's just so these are not two competing things. So I don't think it makes much sense to say, well, I'm interested in living longer, and that's why I preserve my DNA, right? Because your DNA is not you, right? Like, if we move away from
your consciousness is.
Yeah, and if we don't believe in any metaphysical explanation of consciousness, or religious explanation of consciousness, like soul and whatever, then arguably the connections in your brain is what makes you, what makes me, right? So you need to preserve that. The DNA is not enough. And the DNA does not include the information to rebuild the structure in your brain. It includes part of the data.
Is that like your memories and?
Yeah, because you need basically, I mean, there's this nature versus nurture kind of discussion, right? Yes, your DNA includes part of the building plan, but then the other part is the experiences that you have made in your life and that shaped the connections in your brain. So if you just keep your DNA, you would not be you by any intents and purposes. You would have the same DNA, but this would not be, right? At least not in regards to
a clone, essentially.
Lived experience and your consciousness and so on. So you're preserving DNA makes sense, but not due to that.
Yeah, so it's the same as like cloning you. Like the clone wouldn't be the same.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. I'll just answer this one, and then I've got a few questions as well. So this is great, though. Please keep them coming. Should there be restrictions because of population increases and the knock-on effects? So that was actually something I wanted to ask myself.
Population increase is definitely an issue, and I think there are a few points to be said there. So first of all, the amount of people who are interested in cryopreservation right now is negligible for any population increase. Even if the amount would be 100 or 1,000x higher, it would still be negligible. So 1,000x higher would then be around 1 million people signed up for cryopreservation. Currently, I mean, it's a bit more. It would be like 3 million or something like that, or 4 million. But 4 million extra people 100 years in the future is negligible. That's a rounding error. If you're talking at that point, maybe 10 billion.
Although, can I just
go ahead? Sure.
Can I just interject with that? Although you were saying that you need more people to get the prices down to be, say, 10,000 euros. Would you not need more than 3 million people to do that?
Not even remotely.
No.
So you can
Okay, cool.
get the prices down if you are in the range of 100,000 to 1 million. So significantly less than, like, the prices go down significantly quicker than population increase problems.
Mm-hmm.
So the other important thing is population increase historically has been like crazy growth, right? Again, from the 1900s, what was 1900s, 1 billion people or something like that, and now we're at 7. So
it's insane,
right? But all estimations currently are leading to a level off of population somewhere in the thing. I don't remember if it's exactly correct, but somewhere in the vicinity of 9 to 12 billion or something like that. So maintaining, like, we're not on the growth trajectory anymore to, let's say, 100 billion people. Like, we'll probably level out as the global population around the 11 billion mark. What's very important is the Earth does not necessarily have a problem with maintaining that amount, maybe even 20 billion. And I'm not a public health or researcher in that field or at all. But with vertical farming, with new types of energy and so on, you can probably maintain significantly more people. The Earth currently has a distribution problem. The Western countries have way too much, other countries have way too little. But it's not really the case that we have literally, as the Earth, a problem that we can't maintain, for example, let's say 11 billion, right? So population increase is more a theoretical problem than a tangible problem due to those two factors.
Okay, interesting. Will you guys have, this is another question that just came in, will there be mental health support in place as someone will awaken, lost their loved ones? And yeah, what kind of preparations do you, I guessing they're asking, what preparations do you have?
So all of the above, basically. So and all of that will be important, right? So I mean, this is not something where you would say, well, now you've been woken up, and now here's the door, figure it out, right? So I mentioned before that there's different buckets of money that is being kept for making this thing feasible and doing all the procedures that are necessary in the future. And part of that money is also earmarked for exactly that: reintegration in society, potentially retraining, and all of that, right? So the idea would be that you do everything to give the patient a high quality life in the future, right? Which means all the medical stuff that we discussed about, but which also means all the support infrastructure that makes them succeed in a future society, right? Which would include from mental health to reintegration training, or explaining the new society, and all of that will probably be significant changes, of course, and all of that. I believe, though, that even though society changes significantly, at least over the last, let's say, 300 years or so, the fundamental rules of society somehow stayed the same, right? I mean, what we're currently doing, of course, would be very, very foreign to anybody 100 years ago, right? But because I mean, we're video chatting, right? We're somehow in front of screens and all of that. But then again, I mean, if you sit on a table with your friends, that interaction, if you don't touch your mobiles, that interaction is exactly the same 300 years ago. You have a fork, you have a glass, food, you talk to each other, right? Probably you almost talked about kind of the same almost things, right? What's going on with the weather, what's going on at work, what's going on in the family and your relationship, right? So as long as I think these things are fundamentally maintained, and I feel like it looks like they will be maintained for a good amount of time, there's a pretty high chance that you will be able to understand future societies, even though if you've been cryopreserved for 100 years, with some help.
Yeah, I think so. I think even that the same thing could happen now. If you were to take somebody from 100 years ago, it wouldn't take long to integrate them into society now.
Exactly. Computer on the next day, but they would be able to do with some amount of training.
I believe that the biggest negative impact will be the emotional one. Like it must be a very, very strange. Well, nobody's experienced it really, but in theory, it must be extremely traumatizing and quite daunting to if you would wake up and everybody you know is dead. And because I guess the closest thing now would be like somebody in a coma who wakes up 10 years later and everything's changed around them, how overwhelming that must be, because you go in there think with the same mindset and nothing's changed. I read a book by Stephen King recently about a guy who went in a coma, and he woke up, his girlfriend had moved on and had a baby, and it just like it kind of brought over this huge damaging psychological impact of where the last thing he remembers is going on a date with her, and then suddenly he wakes up and to that extreme. I mean, yeah.
That's an issue. Like there's no question there, right? This is not super easy. So I think there are two things, right? So first of all, I mean, ideally, if your friends and your family is down, I mean, they theoretically would be cryopreserved or could be cryopreserved as well, right? So you might have some people that you knew from the past come with you into the future, right? And of course, this is very much what we're going for, right? So even to the we will have family discounts, friends discounts, and whatever, right? Because it makes a lot of sense. And the other part being that I think that humans have a tremendously high capacity to make do with from non-ideal to horrible scenarios, right? I mean, people have crazy traumatizing wars, and yes, these are horrible things, but somehow over time the human mind has the capacity to integrate that in some way and still live a high quality life, right? So while I very much agree that this will definitely not be an easy thing, I think most people would be able to integrate these new concepts and whatever, and this trauma and issues into a meaningful life in the future.
Interesting. That's great. I mean, I hope so. I would like to be able to bring my family, although I feel that it's one of those subjects that is not, most people are kind of against it, really. I mean, I'm hoping that after this, people listening.
So we did large studies recently in the US and in Germany about there's this concept of cryopreservation. Is this something you're interested in? Is this something that you feel like is exciting? Would you want to do it? And depending on how you ask and where you are, US or Germany, you have always about a third of people who say, yeah, this is exciting, this is interesting. I'm not sure if I want to sign up yet, but this is something I want to look into. And it's, of course, way higher than we would ever expect it. So we ran this study twice because we thought we thought there's something wrong. Seems to be a significant interest, right? Then a third of people are usually like, this is not something for me. I'm neutral. I don't really care. And a third is, this is not something for me. I'm not doing that, right?
Do you know the demographics of that? And like, is it older people who want to be preserved, or is it younger people who are more open to it?
It doesn't correlate with age. So the interest doesn't correlate with age. So the study, the US one has a smaller bias because we recruited responses online. So it has a bias towards younger people, more tech savvy people, so on, but not much. A bit, but it's still relatively representative. And in Germany, it is actually representative because we did it with a market research company. And Germany has less interest, but this is mostly explained due to the fact that there's less knowledge about it in Germany and Europe as a whole. But it doesn't correlate with age. It doesn't correlate with wealth. It doesn't correlate with a lot of things where we would say, hey, this should be or this might be a correlation. It seems to be that it correlates probably with some fundamental belief that technology can do it. And then probably with a belief that living longer is a positive value. But
if you can increase your net contribution towards society and your own experiences, then I just can't see that it is any negativity. One of the questions that just popped up, which is something that I thought of asking myself, but for a different reason. So somebody's asked, should this be prioritized for saving endangered species? Which links in with my question, which was going to be, would this be something you would offer to pets? So, but yeah, animal cryopreservation.
So for endangered species, so arguably for endangered species, probably there are better ways to do that, right? Just for example, saving the last. If there's few individuals from that species still around, making sure that they survive and so on, right? Because again, like, it doesn't work, right? You can't bring someone back yet, right? So
Yep.
you don't directly. There's probably better, cheaper methods to do that. And then for endangered species, at least for some, DNA would also be fine. Because then, I mean, at least from an endangered species standpoint, you don't necessarily care about maintaining the consciousness, or whatever it is in an animal, the memories of that animal. You more care preserving the biodiversity of that species, right? So DNA at that point might also be fine. And then for your pet questions, so we're very much focused on humans. Nevertheless, with a sub brand, just realistically speaking, right? I mean, in a hospital, you also only like your pets don't go to the same hospital where you go to, right? So we're very much focused on building a medical company, or are a medical company for humans. Nevertheless, of course, there are families where pets have almost the same attachment as children, maybe, or where perceived as something as close as children. So we have a sub brand and a kind of like a separated thing where pets would also be able to be cryopreserved, but only if the human has a cryopreservation contract as well. So we're not going to offer it as a service for pets if someone wants to do that for their pet, but not for themselves.
Okay. How does it work, or how will it work? So will you need just to pay upfront the amount, whatever the total is, or will there be insurance companies that you can work with that offer this, or how would people sign up when you're actually running?
So fundamentally, there are two big ways of how to fund cryopreservation contracts, right? So one makes more sense when you're younger, and one then would be the one where you're older, right? If you're older, let's say you're 75, at that point you would need to pay out of pocket. So you need to wire a part or the whole money, and right now, and then once something happens to you, we have the money to do the cryopreservation. Or under certain circumstances, you can do that in your last will and only pay a part now, and then the rest is being paid out of your estate once you die. Now, as we mentioned before, cryopreservation is relatively expensive right now. So our prices here in Germany with Tomorrow Biostasis start at 100,000 euros for one cryopreservation, which means if let's say you're 25 and you want to have a cryopreservation and you're studying, right? Then practically no one can pay 100,000 euros out of pocket. And even if they can, they might not want to, because they would rather invest the money or whatever. So at that point, it makes a lot of sense to fund your cryopreservation with a term life insurance contract. So we have a large term life insurance company as one of our partners, where if you sign up with us, in the background, practically speaking, a term life insurance contract is being formed. And when I say term life insurance always means you pay a monthly fee, and then should you die till a certain date, so term life insurance have an end date. Should you die before that date, 100 or 200,000 euros or whatever your coverage amount is being paid out. And it's relatively affordable. So we have, for example, contracts that start at 30 euros per month, right? And the logic of that is always, since it has an end date, there's only a certain probability that you're going to die before that. So the insurance can offer this service relatively affordable. And then the idea, of course, is always, let's say you're 25, you're studying business or computer science or whatever it might be. But any career where you would say, hey, when I'm 60 or when I'm 70, at that point, I'm going to probably be able to pay 100,000 euros out of pocket. Or, and that's what I hope, that at that point, we will be able to offer it significantly cheaper. Now, your term life insurance, where your risk of death is low, so the term life insurance is cheap, let's say till the age of 70 or 60. And for that, you pay, as I said, like starting from 30 euros a month. And then at that point, your term life insurance lapses. So you don't have, if you're 61 and your term life insurance only runs till 60, then at 61, yes, you don't have coverage anymore. But at that point, you might have enough money to just pay out of pocket if you need to. Right?
Okay.
So usually the logic, when you're young, term life insurance is cheap and you can easily protect against getting hit by a car or cancer or of course that's not high probability, but there's still, unfortunately, when I was still practicing medicine in med school and so on, there's always people coming in that unfortunately have cancer very, very early on, even though statistically speaking it's not a crazy risk, and that's also why the insurance is so cheap, because the insurance of course knows that. So it's basically exactly like you pay exactly as much as the risk is about, like.
Okay. You said when you were in med school, I'd actually like to backtrack a bit, if it's okay, and kind of because we didn't go over this at the beginning. How did you actually get into this? Because this seems like quite a jump from being a doctor to setting up this.
I mean, I don't know if it's even that much of a jump, right? I mean, it is, of course, it's a jump, traditionally speaking, right? So my kind of background in a nutshell was I studied medicine with originally the plan to go into cancer research. So I did a lot of cancer research stuff, and then I started building tech companies here in Berlin. Some medical, some absolutely not medicals, also data analysis, and very much also maybe even a bigger jump to what I'm doing now, and I did that for a few years. But my fundamental motivation why I'm doing all these things was always the sector of longevity and life extension. So this is why I went into med school, right? I went into med school to do research for longevity and life extension topics. The reason why I then at some point switched over to cryopreservation and biostasis is because, unfortunately, as I said before, medicine and biology is very, very hard. It's very difficult, right? See this example with cancer research, right? There's billions of dollars being spent every year, and it's not like this is progressing significantly super quickly, and we cure one cancer entity another. Yeah, there are advances, but then again, I mean, we've also been doing the war on cancer for 40 years, well, even more than that. I don't know exactly the number, but significant. I think 76 or something. Living longer is like, life extension and anti-aging and so on is even more complex probably. So since the sector, I don't think that there's a super high probability. As I said before, I hope that I never need to be cryopreserved, but I believe I will need to if I want to live longer. So that was my fundamental kind of reasoning, and that's why I went into med school. That's why I went into cancer research. That's why I went into building companies to make the money to then now be able to invest into this.
Wow. So all of the time whilst you were building up these companies, you had it in your mind, this was like you're working towards a goal of setting this up.
So I'm not yes. And all of that, what we're currently doing is non-profit, right? So this is not about making money by any means. It's only about making as much money so that we can grow it further, and then by growing it further and having more customers, making it cheaper and making it better. So being able to then invest into research, and due to the new research and making it cheaper, have more customers and kind of then have a flywheel where more customers lead to smaller prices and lead to better quality. But this is not about personal money at all. It's all structured as a different types of nonprofits.
Wow. What do your family think of this? Have they been supportive from the start? Do you have Your parents alive, and are they wanting to be cryopreserved?
So they're very supportive. It's not like that they're my
Cool.
customers. So they have not. I don't know if they will, but they're definitely not against it by any means. I mean, I haven't grown up in a very family that's. I mean, they're very supportive with basically all of the things and that as well. But I don't know if they would have started an organization themselves or anything like that.
Okay, I'm just going to check. We've done just over an hour, which is great. In fact, we've done an hour and 5 minutes. Just going to see there's a few more comments. I would expect those interested in doing. Okay, it says I would expect those interested in doing it are those that have a higher self-worth or in a place where they don't want to lose what they have. Somebody in a poorer situation or has a low self-value probably would not want to potentially repeat this.
Yes.
Yeah, how do you tackle that?
It always comes down to a degree to this hierarchy of needs, right? If you're fighting every day about, how do I pay rent next month and how do I bring food on my table next month, then unfortunately, this is not a topic that you will feel like has a high priority for you on a daily basis.
No.
And this is a problem, but this is not necessarily a problem that is unique to cryopreservation, right? This is also unique to
society.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and that's one reason why we try to make it or put a lot of effort into thinking about and doing the thing so that we can make it very affordable. It won't be a thing that where it costs 150 euros at some point. It will always be significantly more expensive, unfortunately, but at least bring it down as much as we can. And even going so far, as I said, this whole thing is a nonprofit, so one thing that we will set up probably at the end of 2021 is something like a hardship fund. So if people want to be cryopreserved, let's say they have some terminal disease, and this is their full wish, their full declared wish, but they just can't afford it, right? At that point, we're founding a fund where wealthy people can pay money into this fund to then pay for cryopreservations for people who can't afford it, either as donations or if they sign up. For every sign up, a small amount of money from the monthly, what is being monthly paid for us for all the infrastructure and so on, goes into that fund. And so the idea is to make this difference as small as possible. But unfortunately, with every advanced medical technology, it is not fully possible in the very beginning. But it is possible that it is doable in the future, right?
Okay, great. No, that's brilliant. Just to finish up, is there, have you got any information or what would you recommend as a resource for people that are listening that want to know more about this and want to find out about what you're doing with it and in general about the field of cryopreservation?
Right.
Why would you say for people to start?
Right. So first of all, of course, they can easily start on our webpage, right? Tomorrowbiostasis.com. So tomorrowbiostasis.com. And there's a lot of links, outgoing links to other resources, to videos we've made, and so on. So that might be a thing. If you've never really thought about this topic and kind of want to have a rundown of the arguments and what the logic behind it is and so on, then there's a good article on a webpage called Wait But Why. It's a few years old, but still gives a rundown of this whole. It's a very much a long form article, so you need to bring a few minutes to read it all. But it's a very good 101 introduction.
Okay.
So be recommended, and if you go on our webpage, it's also linked there. I think this is kind of the go-to places. And then as I said, like we're more than open also to just have a chat with anybody who's interested, even though if they've not decided yet to sign up, but just want to ask some questions. We have a team, and also I'm being part of it, that is always down to jump on a half-hour call to discuss and to answer questions and so on. And also not only if they want to sign up with us, but also let's say they're from another country where we're not even able to, or we're not currently active, but they might want to sign up with Alco or CI and need some help or whatever. We're more than happy to provide that. So also feel free to just reach out to us.
Brilliant. What is the timeline when you're expecting to be up and running?
Oh, in Germany we are. So we're accepting.
You have people now accepted?
So they're not cryopreserved, so we don't have patients yet. But
that's what I mean. Sorry, yeah.
No. So and the reason for that is because of course how we run this whole thing. Our target group is mostly people in the age range of 25 to 40, right? So just statistically speaking, it's not super likely that anybody of those is going to die anytime soon, right? So we're more going for a younger demographic, but of course, this from a marketing perspective, anybody and everybody, no matter of age, is of course welcome. But from a marketing standpoint, because it's significantly easier to do marketing with 25-year-olds than with 85-year-olds.
Yeah. I received the emails from you, and you were talking about into the construction phase for one facility, right?
Yeah, so that's a research facility. So as we discussed in multiple in the call, research is very very important, and we kind of have the separation, right? We have a customer facing company that is Tomorrow Biostasis, and that gets more customers to then be able to do more research. But a company, the structure is not necessarily the best structure to do research, so we then hand that over to a research organization that is purely focused on the biomedical, basic science almost research of that. Yeah.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. If there's anything else you would like to say, feel free. And yeah,
I think we covered
I appreciate doing this.
That you can talk way longer about this topic, but in a nutshell, and if people are interested, as I said, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy, even though you just want to answer some questions, we're more than happy to take some time to discuss with people. Yeah. And then last but not least,
Perfect. Yeah.
The viewers and of course to you, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch, and I'll keep following what you do. It's great. I'm really interested on a personal level, and maybe when the research facility is set up, maybe when lockdown is over, we can do the podcast again. Or if you do if you're at any conferences, maybe we can do a little catch-up podcast there.
Yeah, maybe that's another point. Maybe that I forgot. So we're running a yearly annual biomedical research conference, which was just the first installment in the end of October, and the next one is going to be in October 2021. Actually, this time located in Zurich and not online, called biostasis2021.com. So feel free to check that out as well if you're interested in the research part of things.
Cool, perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening. This has been Shifty Perspective, episode 25 with Dr. Emil Kendziorra. We will put any links in the description and you can check it out. Make sure you follow the links. If you've got any questions, send me a message or send them a message.